So I wrote to Internal Revenue. You know, when you get a problem, write to Internal Revenue because they're there to help you. Service, right? Service you can trust. You can trust the man who wears the red star, Internal Revenue. So I said, I've got a problem. I want to be a good patriot, and I want to pay my taxes. But we can't use gold because gold was demonetized. I have a letter right here from the Federal Reserve Board of Governors. Their attorney writes to me, and he tells me we demonetized it. I can't pay you in silver because we demonetized that too. Now, I said, the only thing that appears to be current as money is debt. I've got 2 books right here, and I quote them. But I have a problem. If debt is what we've monetized, then what we have turned into money or coined into money is a sum of money due. In other words, a sum of money due is money. Now, if I deliver it to you, it would no longer be due. So I'm going to have to owe it to you. I've been owing it to him for a few years. Well, it's true, isn't it? The truth is stranger than fiction. Debt is a sum of money due. If you deliver it, it will no longer be due, would it? Payment is the delivery. I can't deliver it because if I deliver it, it'll no longer be due. What will no longer be due? Debt. What is debt? Debt's a sum of money due. I'm going to have to owe it to you. I have to keep it owing or due so it'll remain money, because who am I, a mere sandwich maker in Calais, Maine, to demonetize that which the monetary authority of the United States has declared to be money? You see, the money we're trying to save is the money we never got because the banks never put it into circulation because they never had any to loan. If you don't believe it, convert all of your assets into those, put them in a plastic bucket, bury them in your backyard, and wait for about 10 years, dig them up and see what you've got. You'll have a sum of money due. What'll it be worth then? It won't be worth anything then. Why? Because it was never delivered. What was never delivered? The money that was due. Due to whom? Due to you. They never delivered it. Who never delivered it? The banks never delivered it. They only gave you an evidence of promising to lend it. That's exactly what the Federal Reserve said in Modern Money Mechanics, page 4. Then bankers discovered they could make loans merely by giving borrowers their promises to pay. Banknotes. Never been paid. Well, I pay for things. You do? Sure. Why, I paid for some gasoline today. I doubt it. Federal Reserve Bank of Boston puts out a little publication entitled Electronic Money and the Payments Mechanism. How many people here knew that electrons were money? And can tell me how many electrons to the dollar? Next time you get a shock on a wall outlet, you go, whoo, about 155 bucks. I used to be a corporate pilot. I discovered in reading a book here called The Culpeper Switch. Culpeper Switch is that place up there in Culpeper, Virginia, which is buried in the side of a mountain, bomb-proof, blast-proof, or whatever, Federal Reserve, and they transmit trillions of dollars through the air every year. If I had known that when I was a corporate pilot, I would have gotten all kinds of receivers, taken off, and just started collecting it all, and I would have retired. They tell us here on page 7 and 8, as any economist worth his salt would be quick to point out, I wish we were using salt as money, at least we'd have something we could measure. Money has been a measure of value. It's also been a storehouse of value, which in due course has led to its use as a standard of deferred payment. Is payment the same thing as deferred payment? If deferred payment is as good as payment, I will continue to defer. What does defer mean? Well, anybody who dodged the draft back in the Vietnam era knows that defer means to postpone, put off, or delay, hopefully forever. It's exactly what the Fed did. And this book has been reprinted about 10 times. We use those not to make payment. We use those to defer payment. Why, Bruce, I thought we used credit cards to do that. No, you use credit cards to defer the deferment. Nothing has been delivered yet. Well, I pay for things. No, you don't. Payment is the delivery of money. This is a piece of paper with a number 10 on it. When you deliver one piece of paper, you haven't delivered 10 of anything. You only think you have. Better still, the other person thought so too. That's what really counts. It's not what you think. It's really what everybody else thinks. We live in a world of peer pressure, don't we? We care what everybody else thinks. Well, supposing I wrote a check over to this gentleman here, and I said, how much do you want for your watch over there? Throw me a price for that watch. I guess there's a little disparity there. I write him a check for $100. I give him the check. I don't know his name. I've forgotten already. And I write the check out, paid to the order of cash. I write my name and I give it to him. Have I paid him for the watch yet? Or have I merely given him an order form telling somebody else to pay him? Is an order form telling somebody else to pay the same thing as payment? Payment is delivery. All I've delivered to him is an order telling somebody else to deliver. We don't know if that check's any good. And I'm here to tell you, folks, that no check in America is any good, but some are worse than others. Now, I give him the check, he gives me the watch. Wonderful. He then goes downtown, sees this nice entrepreneur here smoking a cigar, running a nice hardware store, and he's selling skill saws. How much for that skill saw? He says, $100. Well, he says, I don't happen to have any Federal Reserve notes, but I got a check made out to cash for $100 made out by Bruce McCarthy. Would you take it? He says, yeah, I've been to a meeting. I've heard him speak. Sounds like a good fellow. I believe he's a Christian. I trust him. Oh, boy. He gives him a check. He gives him the skill saw. Has this man paid for the saw yet? No. This gentleman then goes to the bank and presents the check. He says, I want to cash the check. Now, here's the banker right here. Sorry, I didn't mean, I could have called you a lot of other things, and a banker's probably about as bad as what I could have called you. Anyway, the banker says, I'm sorry, Bruce McCarthy closed out his checking account probably 2 or 3 years ago. That check's no good. I guess he's writing bad checks just like we are and claiming equal protection of the laws or something. What happened? This guy took 100% loss. He's out the saw. But he doesn't care. Because, you see, he got what he wanted. You see, back up. This guy took a loss of 100%, didn't he? If he took a loss of 100%, somebody must have taken a 100% gain. Who did that? I did. I got the watch for free. Now, a 100% gain is income, and I'd have to declare that on next year's 1040 form. That's right. Gain is profit. Okay, I have to declare that. And Internal Revenue wants its share of any theft or any embezzlement. Isn't that right? Yes, they've had embezzlement cases, I understand. And Internal Revenue gets right in there and gets its share of illegal funds. That's right. Embezzlement is a gain or a profit. It's income. Now, I got his watch for free, but he didn't care because he took the check in good faith and passed it off similarly, and that gentleman there compensated for him for what I stole from him. This man never got paid with a skill saw. He got compensated with a skill saw for what I stole from him because I never paid him. And if I never paid him, he couldn't have paid him. But he got compensated with this guy. Compensation works from the back end of a transaction to the forward end. Payment starts at the beginning of a transaction and works to the end. Do you understand that? Should be no question on it. You see, it would make no difference how many times that check passes from hand to hand until the issuer buys that check back at par. There is never any payment. That's why they'll tell you and say something like the Maine Criminal Code at Title 17A, Section 708, that a person is guilty. Well, I think we've got that written on the back here on the triple tax side, on the back end of this thing. Yeah. About 2/3 of the way down, it says, a person is guilty of negotiating a worthless instrument if he intentionally issues or negotiates a negotiable instrument knowing that it will not be honored by the maker or the drawee. You see, everybody will tell you, hey, you can go get your groceries for a Federal Reserve note, but the person down at the grocery store is not the maker of that note. If the maker won't buy back your check, the check's no good. You must buy back your own check. You can't get everybody else to buy it back. Until you buy back your check, there's never any payment on that check. It must be honored by the maker. I don't care who gives you what for a Federal Reserve note. You see, a judge will look at you, and he'll tell you, Mr. McCarthy, you pay for your groceries with Federal Reserve notes, don't you? Oh, no, sir. No, I just get my groceries. You see, folks, any one of us in this room could go down to the local supermarket and get all the groceries we want. And there wouldn't be anybody down there at the supermarket that said, hey, I just saw Bruce McCarthy down at the supermarket today. Yeah, what was he doing? Oh, he was buying his groceries with an Uzi. No. No, what they might be more prone to say is that I saw Bruce down at the supermarket today. Yeah, what was he doing? He was attempting to defer the payment with an Uzi. You see, you can get things by begging for them, stealing them, borrowing them, or paying for them. But those are not synonyms. I had a person call me up one time. We were on a radio station over in Salt Lake City, I think it was. He said that I was butchering the English language. Why? Because I made a difference between getting something and paying for it. Butchering the English language. Well, you'll go out of here thinking what you want to. I can't convince you any other way, but by the way, Florida Patriots Association has told me last spring that the special agents for internal revenue down there now carry that weapon. Think about that next time somebody comes knocking on your door and he says he's a special agent for internal revenue. What's he doing carrying a machine gun in pistol form? Self-protection. Yeah. He's going to need it one of these days, too. Amen. The day is coming. Well, if I can find these Fed notes here, we'll take a quick rundown on the Fed note before we take our little break. Give our fannies a little circulation. Federal Reserve notes, are they federal? No. Go to their own books. They'll tell you, I bet you thought. Page 21. The 12 regional reserve banks, there are 12 regional reserve banks, right? Okay. We notice, for example, on this bill here, we have the letter A that appears in the seal. That's the first letter of the alphabet. First district. That's the Boston Fed. All right? That's why this little tiny 1 appears down here in the corner. That's the first district. Now, if you look down a few notes, you may see a letter G on one of your notes. Second note down, that's the 7th letter of the alphabet. Count it out, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. 7th, so the number 7 appears in the corner here. It's the 7th district. That's the Chicago Fed. The 12 regional reserve banks aren't government institutions, but corporations nominally owned by member commercial banks. Who says? Federal Reserve Bank of New York. Or we can rely upon, I bet a lot of people, how many people here have seen this ad that appeared for computer programmers in Computer World? Good. People seen that. July 16, 1979, Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco was looking for computer programmers. Quote, the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco. Some people still think we're a branch of the government. Third sentence. This is a long one now. No, hang on. Bear with me. We're not. We can go beyond that, but I mean, no point in flogging a dead horse. Federal Reserve Banks, of course, aren't federal. Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, says that federal means of or pertaining to the federal government. Federal government doesn't own any stock in the Federal Reserve, but most of us knew that anyway. Now, reserve. Are there any reserves? What is a reserve, by the way?
Something held back.
Yeah. Something that's held back, something that's on deposit in the way of money to redeem a note or a check. When you write checks, you've got to have 100% reserve. When you write notes, you and I would have to have 100% reserve. Federal Reserve started off with 40% reserve, and by the way, in 1945, that was reduced to what? 25%, that's right. And in 1968, it was reduced again to what? 0. What the heck? A promise to pay gold is just as good as gold. Why bother get gold? It's a waste of time digging it out of the ground. Well, we'll just write promises to pay the gold and take the promise off. Well, I'll just promise to pay my taxes, and I'll write the promise. I'll just write the promise off, too. Simple. Are there any reserves? No. Who says? Federal Reserve. Who? New York. I bet you thought. Page 29. Currency. Is that currency or is it currency note? No. Currency note. I keep making that mistake. Currency cannot be redeemed or exchanged for treasury gold or any other asset used as backing. What did it say in Title 17A, Section 708 of the Main Criminal Code? A person is guilty when he knows that the maker won't buy that back at par. We're all guilty of fraud, aren't we? Confirmation, coins and currency, Federal Reserve Bank of New York, page 14, the only page that's written in red letters. There are no longer any specific backing requirements against Federal Reserve notes. They've just told us they're fraud. Good. Now, it says that it's $10, is it? No, it's only one piece of paper. It couldn't be 10 of anything. Well, it says this note is legal tender. Is it a legal tender? What is legal tender anyway? Yeah, but we're going to take the words apart now. Oliver Hunt, back in the 1800s, I think it was, wrote a book called The Laws of Tender. And apparently tender is the verb, means to offer. Now, legal is the form of law. Okay? Not the substance of law. It's the form of law. It is a formalistic offer to pay the money. It isn't the money. It only offers to pay the money. Remember, the earlier note said this note is legal tender and is redeemable in lawful money. The Treasury now writes to people like Craig Buchanan out there in Colorado, and they tell him that legal tender and lawful money are synonymous. That's funny. The old note said this note is legal tender and redeemable in lawful money. How could they be synonymous? Are they saying that this lawful money is redeemable in lawful money? Or are they saying that this legal tender is redeemable in legal tender? Doesn't make sense. This turkey is redeemable in turkeys. Pretty good. This coupon is redeemable in coupons. I'll buy that. Is it a legal tender? Well, according to the courts, and I won't cite you the case because I can't remember the case, which is just as well, if a tender is not kept at par, then the tender is considered abandoned. Now, you know that's true, don't you? Because if you write a check for $100 and you've got $50 in the account, your check isn't half good, half bad. It's a bad check. Why? Because he abandoned the tender. He abandoned the offer to pay. The Federal Reserve has abandoned the offer to pay. They won't pay anything. That's a terrible abandonment. Can an abandoned tender be a legal tender? I'd love to hear some judge tell me that. I'm sure there's one that will tell you that, too. They'll tell you just about anything. So, it's not federal, no reserves, not a note, not $10, and not legal tender. It's a five-way fraud just by reading the face of the note itself. A note is an unconditional promise to pay money by someone to someone at a specified time. It doesn't tell you who's paying, doesn't tell you who's being paid, doesn't tell you what's being paid, doesn't tell you when. Not bad. Did I say that too fast? I think you got it. What is it? Is it currency? No. Currency is whatever's current is money. Is it cash? No. Cash is money. Curlin versus Young. What is it? It is a fiscal enema. We heard about that on the telephone. What's a fiscal enema? A fiscal enema is a word that we coined. A fiscal enema is a debt instrument injected into the economy by the banking system to see what can be flushed out of us. Let's take a little bit of a break. I'm going to turn it over. Do you want to say anything to these nice people, Bill? We'll take a break here.
Take about 10 minutes, max.
Okay. 3. Now you'd think that the monetary authority of the United States would know enough to start a book on page 1, but the first page is page 3. A politician is addressing the home folks. For the first 15 minutes, he extols states' rights. You people like that down here, down the South, right? States' rights. And the crowd cheers. For the second 15 minutes, he tells how he's going to fight for an increase in federal subsidies. And the crowd cheers just as enthusiastically. The speaker and his constituents are good examples of the split vision with which Americans view government. In principle, many of us are against the extension of federal influence and control, but in practice, we turn right around and apply for each and every governmental benefit that happens to be available. What does he call this? He calls this a kind of schizophrenia. And that's exactly what Americans face. Am I right? People don't like government, and then suddenly they want everything that they can get from it. I was looking at some high school textbooks back up in Maine, and the textbooks are telling us of all of the resources that government has at its disposal. Government has no resources but what it steals from those who produce to give to those who don't. We talked about the Federal Reserve and the fact that the Federal Reserve is our central bank. Now, the central bank is rather important, but we go to a Federal Reserve publication. Many of them will tell you that the Federal Reserve is the central bank. But we'll just take one, your money in the Federal Reserve System, Federal Reserve Bank of Minneapolis, page 9. Since 1913, the Federal Reserve System has functioned as the central bank of the United States. Now, a central bank is very important in our study of the conspiratorial theory of history as opposed to the accidental theory. In fact, anybody who reads the Bible knows that there's no accident. Everything's intentional. And there was a book written by a fellow named Moses Mordecai Levy back in the 1800s, and it bears very heavily on today's political economy. He wrote it under an alias. What was that alias? Karl Marx. It's called the Communist Manifesto. Anyway, Mr. Levy, let's call an ace and a spade, shall we? Mr. Levy said here on page 104 that we had to have 10 planks to communize a nation. The fifth plank was the central bank, was it not? Quote, centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank with state capital and an exclusive monopoly. Isn't it an exclusive monopoly? Why, heck, those Federal Reserve notes, those things aren't copyrighted, and yet if you and I go out and we start printing them just like those, redeemable in just what those are redeemable in, we go to jail for illegal counterfeiting. Not counterfeiting, illegal counterfeiting. Counterfeiting has already been sanctioned. Those are the people that do that. That's the fifth plank of the Communist Manifesto. Now, we got that the same year we got the second plank of the Communist Manifesto, which is what? Yeah. Now, you know, when you go out and you tell somebody that the income tax is Karl Marx's second plank of the Communist Manifesto, they look at you like you're some sort of a fruit. How would you know? Go down to the bookstore. Just ask any paperback bookstore to get you a copy of the Communist Manifesto. They'll look at you kind of funny because they'll think you're one of those, you know, Reds. Only costs you a couple bucks. And you just take it over to them and you say, look, second plank, quote, a heavy progressive or graduated income tax. I guess you're not so crazy after all. Now, with the passage of the fifth plank, central bank, which gave us these Federal Reserve notes, and the second plank, which gave us the 16th Amendment, that pretty well sealed our fate with regards to the first plank of the Communist Manifesto, which was abolition of property in land and application of all rents of land to public purposes. Aren't we just tenants in common on our property? We don't own it, even if you don't have any bank payments. Go a couple of years without paying your property tax and see who takes your land. Now, I'm very fortunate that I hold my vest in allodium, allodial freehold, right? I owe no fee to a higher source or a higher authority. Now, the word allodial or allodium does not appear in every Tom, Dick, and Harry type dictionary. But if you get a comprehensive dictionary, you will find the word. It means without fee or rent to any higher authority. Isn't that wonderful? And I believe the Bible contemplates that there would be no fee or rent in land. Otherwise, your property would ultimately be taken away from you, even by the church through the tithe. I'm not so sure if the church isn't going to try to take you away through tithes anyway. Seems about the only thing they like out of the law these days. You know, I got talking with Bill the other day, and I made a statement, and I'm going to say it again. If you tried to take away the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto, I would be willing to bet you that over 90% of the American people would fight you tooth and nail. Take away free mandatory education, 10th plank, we wouldn't have it. Why, how do you expect us to turn out good little socialist beasts? Take away the 8th plank of the Communist Manifesto, the Equal Rights Amendment. What's the 8th plank? Equal liability of all to labor. It was only a generation ago there was only one party in the household that did the work. I wasn't saying that the woman didn't do any work, but the only one person that went out and supposedly won the bread and brought it back in. Now it takes two. It wouldn't surprise me any if in the next couple of years we're going to see all the teenagers having to go to work with mom and pop to see to it that the family can still survive. It's a good system. You couldn't take the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto away from 90% of the American people. And I bet you that's even a conservative statement. And they'd fight you tooth and nail. You'd think that the income tax would be the first thing they'd want to get rid of. Well, if people didn't pay income tax, how's the government going to operate? Through pure confiscation. They don't need the tax. That's why I love to speak to patriot groups, because most patriot groups are all up in arms about the income tax. Heck, the income tax is nothing compared to that. That is the tax, and it's 100% confiscation. The income tax is only used to conceal a fraud, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. The purpose of notes is to get wealth, remember the fiscal anima? A debt instrument injected into the economy by the banking system to see what can be flushed out of us. A note, the only purpose of a note is to get wealth without payment. What is wealth? Wealth is natural resources or something produced by human exertion which has an exchange parity in the marketplace. Is that wealth? No. Because the party that got that got it for free. The party that issued it. How do we know that? Well, we're going to start off by going to a treasury brochure called The Dollar of the Future. That's like saying the ounce of the future, the ton of the future, the cubic yard of the future. That's what by analogy, that's what we'd be saying. They tell us here that the $1 bill costs nearly 2 cents to produce. Show of hands, how many of us here in this room get $1 bills for nearly 2 cents? Okay. So we go over to the post office there in Calais one day, and I'm talking with a nice postal clerk. I said, I get a brochure that says that the government gets $1 bills for nearly 2 cents. Oh, is that right? Yeah. I got a question. Who gets the other 98 cents? Shrugs his shoulders, I don't know. Turns around and walks away. Now, folks, if you came into my sandwich shop and you got a sandwich that cost $1, and as you're walking out the door, I said, psst, confidentially, I got that for just a little under 2 cents. You wouldn't be one step out the door before you figured out how it was I spent my winters in the Bahamas. 98% profit. That son of a gun. I got a call from the Bureau of Engraving and Printing, Mr. Robert Stevens, 2 years ago. We spent 45 minutes on the telephone. I'm glad he called me. They didn't pay for it. They got the phone call for free, right? And he tells me, quote, we get $100 bills for the same price. I said, I know that. I have never heard of a counterfeiter counterfeiting ones. It doesn't cost any more to counterfeit 100s. There's no more paper, no more labor, and no more ink in a $100 bill than there is in a one. Now, let's give the Treasury a benefit of the doubt. Let's say they pay a full 2 cents to get a $100 bill. What's the markup? Not the percentage of profit. What's the markup? I like that figure. It's a lot bigger. I think it's 500,000%. Multiply it out if you want to challenge me. Because I'm not very good at math. I'm terrible at math.
What is it, 10 to 1 they can put out?
That's better than that. If for 2 cents you can get $100, that's more than 10 to 1.
Must be
That's 500,000% markup. If you made 500,000% markup on what you sold into the marketplace, would you be worried about balancing your budget? Be the last thing on your mind. You see, the federal government operates on a balanced budget. It does, doesn't it? The federal government takes in no money, and it spends no money. Zero in and zero out is a balanced budget. Isn't that right? I have never heard of a thief who counterfeited bills in his basement worried about balancing his budget. Bruce McCarthy was counterfeiting last night in his basement. How'd you find out? Well, he was really worried. He was having all kinds of attacks and so forth, and he had to get all kinds of Excedrin. Why was he worried? He was trying to figure out how to balance his budget. Why would a counterfeiter worry about balancing his budget? He doesn't. It's an illusion to keep you from figuring out that the federal government spends nothing, taxes nothing in the way of money. Now, you feel a loss, but what you feel a loss of is not a loss of substance, because there's no substance that goes to Washington, D.C. that's expressed in dollars. But if you think there is, you tell me what it is, and I'll give you a pound of it absolutely free. They told us in this little publication here that each new Anthony dollar costs only 3 cents to produce. Who gets the other 97 cents? The federal government. Now, think, it's hard for us to do, you know. I don't do it but maybe a few minutes a day, and that gets me exhausted. Anaconda Copper Company mines copper, I think. Now, if you're going to make a Susan B. Agony super quarter, you're going to make it out of 95% copper. Do you think the federal government takes 3 pieces of copper called pennies and sends them in the mail to Anaconda Copper Company and says, would you send us enough copper so that we can make a Susan B. Anthony dollar coin? Why would you buy copper with copper? Why would you buy wheat with wheat? You don't. And you don't buy gold with gold. You might buy gold with silver, and you might buy silver with gold. But you don't buy silver with silver. You've already got silver. Why would you want to buy more of it? You'd have to give up silver to get silver. That's absurd. You're only supporting the postal system that way. But if you think the federal government or the Treasury or the Federal Reserve pays for the copper, you tell me what the cents measure, you tell me what the substance is, and we'll give you a pound of that absolutely free. My contention is that in terms of money, the federal government and the Federal Reserve pay absolutely no thing to get ink, labor, and paper to make the bills or to make the coins. Can you imagine we're sitting downstairs in this little bank building here, and we're printing out bills. We'll print tens. They're easy. And this guy here in the white shirt and the tie with a smile there, he says, gee, he says, Bruce, we're running short of paper. We're going to go out of business. Are we? No, I'm going to say to him, go get some more paper. What is he going to get the paper with? Something we ran off the machine. What did it cost us for the paper? Nothing. We're printing along. Hey, Bruce, yeah? We're almost out of ink. Oh, gee, that's terrible. We're going to have to quit the counterfeiting business. We're going to have to go to work now. I'm going to give him a few more of those, and he's going to go down to the place and get some ink. What did the ink cost? Well, pretty soon the machine's starting to get a little wear on it. Clickety-clack, clickety-clack. Hey, Bruce, sounds like a train. Yeah, we got to get a new machine. Yeah, this machine's, as soon as this thing's broken, we're going to be out of business. Got to get a new machine. What are we going to get the new machine with? Clickety-clack, clickety-clack, we'll print a few more. Absolutely free. Well, we have two types of money. So the Fed says. We get a high-powered money and something else which must be low-powered, I don't know. But they think the Federal Reserve notes are high-powered money. So I call those high enemas. The National Debt, a nice little publication with the Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia. Thank you very much, Philadelphia, for sending these books out. They don't put any page numbers on this. Apparently they try to save bucks. Page 8, or what it should be page 8, it says here, quote, the federal government, with the cooperation of the Federal Reserve, has the inherent power to create money, hyphen, almost any amount of it. Well, I wrote to Internal Revenue, and I said, I got a problem. Says here that the federal government gets all the money they need, or just about all of it. If the things that you think I'm getting are money, and I know they're not, but if they were, and you could get all you wanted by creating all you needed, why would you need mine? If bread was going to be used as money and I could create all the bread I wanted, why would I need your bread? I wouldn't. They won't answer. Amos Bruce, that famous taxi cab driver, that sagacious taxi cab driver, yeah, wild and woolly Amos, he wrote a letter to the Philadelphia Fed, and he asked them, it says here that you can create almost any amount of it. What limits the amount of money you can create? Well, they said two things. One, the speed of the presses, and two, the rate at which the public will accept it. You can get some interesting answers from the Federal Reserve banks if you write the right questions. Don't expect them to keep giving you the same answers, though. If you had the power to create money, almost any amount of it, is there anybody you couldn't buy? Is there any election you couldn't overturn? Is there any political, economics, political education course that you couldn't pervert by writing the textbooks and funding foundations to crank out a bunch of idiots to tell our children what a wonderful job the government is doing of managing this fraud? Is there any theological cemetery you couldn't overturn by telling them, I'll give you $5 million if you preach John 3:16 and stay away from the rest of the Bible? I was looking through a consolidated encyclopedia when I was in the Bahamas a couple years ago, and I went through it page by page, 10 volumes. It was written in 1930. I ran across the Rockefeller family, and would you believe that the Rockefeller family had contributed, and this was written in 1930, they had contributed $5 million in gold to the foreign Baptist missions. They must have got religion. And $5 million in gold to domestic Baptist missions. He must have gotten religion. He was probably getting to feel guilty. God was calling him. Time to repent, John D.
Amen.
Or was he trying to get them to make a few changes? I wouldn't kick in 10 million bucks of anything unless I had a little bit of say as to where it was going to go.
John D. hired Reverend Harry F. Ward. He's the one that brainwashed the preachers. John D. Rockefeller, Harry F. Ward did it.
We have what people call a debt usury system. I've heard Sheldon Emery use the term. What is a debt usury system? Well, I'll define it. I'll define the words as they are. Not sure what everybody else means with them. Debt is a sum of money due. In other words, the money we're using is the money we don't have. Usury is the fee that the banks charge us for the use of the money we didn't get. Now, the Bible condemns usury. And usury in Old English law, see, there are two schools of thought. One is that usury is interest, and another one says that usury is excessive interest. And I've seen people argue that in patriot newspapers. And they say that they're not synonymous. Black's Law Dictionary, 2nd edition that I have, says that in Old English law, usury is, quote, interest of money, period. In modern law, it is interest charged beyond what the law allows. Now, the mores of the people in this country came from this book. This book was written into the English language, at least the King James, what year? 1611? Somewhere in there? No? I bet you Old English law was prevailing back then, and I bet usury and interest were the same thing. That's what I bet. The Bible says you will not exact usury of your brethren. Didn't say a lot of it. I've been told that 6% and above is usurious and 5% and under is okay. Show me the passage where God says that 5% and under it's all right, 6% and over and it's usury. And I will review and revise my stance on the subject. Banks create principal out of thin air, right downtown, just like this bank here. Who tells on them? The Federal Reserve Bank tells on the local banks. The Story of Banks, a little comic book, page 5, 6 little pictures, and here we have a smiling banker. And you'd smile too if you could do what he's doing to us. Because of the fractional, Dave Wilbur calls it the fictional, because of the fictional reserve system, banks as a whole can expand our money supply several times. What banks? Central banks? No. All banks. How do they expand the money supply? Hyphen. By making loans and investments. Loaning what? Loaning the money they didn't have. If you loaned the money you had, you couldn't increase the supply of what you had. Right? And they show you in these 5 remaining pictures how if you... Anybody here get a checking account? Oh, come on. Raise them high. Come on, I want to find out how many you got. I want to make sure that the camera's got that good. We're going to have IRS seize your bank records and clean out your account. That'll teach you a lesson. But now, folks, believe me, is the time to repent. Now is the time on that particular issue. It used to be, according to the Federal Reserve, on a 15% reserve requirement, every $1,000, and we'll use that as a simple figure, it could be 10 or it could be 100, whatever, but every $1,000 you put in your local bank allowed the bank downtown to create another 6,000. How did it do that? With a book entry. Every 1,000 you put in the bank in a demand deposit, which is a checking account, because you can demand the deposit withdrawn, whereas a savings account is a time deposit. And if you read the fine print in your savings account book, they can require you to wait 30 days to withdraw. But the reserve requirement on time deposits was even lower. They could create more on those. Every $1,000 you put in your checking account as an average balance allowed your local banker to create another 6,000 that he never had. And he could turn right around and he could loan you that 6,000 at interest if you met his impeccable standards of morality and decency. Because you must be of good moral character to pay back the loan. What loan? The loan they never made. With interest to boot. I've got a hard time accepting that. If I'm going to loan you my automobile, I best have an automobile to loan you. But I can't loan you a promise to pay an automobile and expect you to pay me back the equivalent of an automobile through blood, sweat, and tears, plus the interest to boot. The Bible condemned usury or interest on a loan. If God condemned us for charging interest on a loan of a substance, what would he think if he found out that the banks in America were charging interest on loans of nothing? Would we be ripe for judgment? Mm-hmm. That's when the reserve requirement on demand deposits was 15%. Does anybody know what the reserve requirement is right now since the deregulation of banking? 3% on the first 25 million. Because you see, if it was reduced to 0% on everything, then the local banks would get just as powerful as the Fed, and the Fed ain't going to let the local banks outstrip the Fed by out-cheating the American people. Only the Fed can cheat the American people with no limit. The local banks have got a limit as to how much they can cheat you. Otherwise, they get just as big as the Fed. And the Fed, those guys aren't stupid. We take another little booklet. It's called Money and Economic Balance. New York Fed, page 17, says here that commercial banks are important financial institutions because they can create money, checkbook money. Bear in mind, since the deregulation of banking in 1980, not only the commercial banks, but now all the banks can create money if they have checkable deposits, whatever a checkable deposit is. When we borrow $200 at a local bank to buy a washing machine, we sign an IOU, and the banker, does he loan us money? No. He writes a slip, for a $200 addition to our checking account. Why doesn't it say that he loans us money? He doesn't. He writes a slip and adds the number 200 to our checking account. You see, in order to take a loan from a bank, you really ought to have a checking account. Why? Because you're going to write a fraudulent check. If you're going to participate in the scheme, you've got to write the fraudulent check. You open up an account, you write the fraudulent check, and we'll give you the fraudulent entry to write in that check. No one has any less money on deposit, but we have more. I'm going to loan him my automobile, Suburban. If I loan him my Suburban, I have one less Suburban, and he's got one more Suburban. How could I loan him an automobile and not lose my automobile? That's what they said here. We make the loan and nobody has any less money, but we all have more. Tell Chrysler Corporation how to do that, and they could probably be saved from any further bankruptcy problems. The banker has bought our IOU with new demand deposits, checkbook money, which were created. That's beautiful. Why go to work for a living when all you have to do is to create demand deposits? Is it difficult? No. Adrian W. Throop of the Federal Reserve Bank of San Francisco told us, August 1980, in Money in the Economy on page 4, it, the banks, can make loans and investments with a stroke of a pen. Why go to work? Why was it that a guidance counselor in school didn't ask me, Bruce, would you like to go to work for a living or would you like to be a banker? What's the difference? Well, one, you have to produce, and the other one, you merely have to expropriate. Well, which is harder? Well, producing. Well, I guess I just want to be an expropriator then. It's a closed society. Only certain people are given the power to expropriate. They're called communists. Why do banks charge interest on a loan? If they can, right. Have you heard my sermon before? You're too smart. You knew all the answers all along, didn't you? Well, there has to be one in every crowd.
At least he can't be an IRS agent.
Well, most likely. Either that or he's a very good double agent. If a bank makes you a loan by creating the principal, why does it have to charge you the interest on it? It doesn't.
To complete the illusion.
To complete the illusion. Now, most people don't know that. Believe me, if you would let me open up a bank here in Atlanta, I will guarantee if you allow me to create deposits, I won't charge you any interest. I can live on that. Now, this man right here wants to take a loan. He wants to borrow $1,000. Now, back at the turn of the century, remember the banks? We had a lot of national banks that were printing their own notes. Well, they had somebody else printing the notes, but they were issuing the notes. And they were issued against nothing. A lot of notes were issued against nothing. That's why we've always had bank problems. It's hard to overcome that. You know, print a few extras, boys. He says, Bruce, I want to borrow $1,000. I said, what do you want to borrow it for? He said, well, I want to build a new outhouse with 2 electrically heated toilet seats. Well, I think that's very good, and it's ecologically sound, and I like you. I'll make you the loan of $1,000 at no interest. Well, gee, he just floats out of my bank. Boy, this Bruce McCarthy, he's a great guy. He just floats away. Now, he goes over to this gentleman here, Mr. Pendergrass. Mr. Pendergrass is a carpenter. I just made him one. God, right? I'm a banker. I can make him a carpenter. Now, he's going to build the outhouse. Now, he wants $1,000 to build it. And he says, are these notes any good? And the guy says, sure, I just saw Bruce printing them this afternoon. They must be good. Oh, okay, good. So he works by the sweat of his brow, as he was commanded in Genesis and the book of Exodus, and he works to get the $1,000, which I got for free and printed and gave to him, so that he can get the outhouse that he's going to build. Now, at the end of the loan period, this gentleman here is going to have to earn the $1,000 back because he's got to pay me back the $1,000. Now, where are they? Well, they're out in society. Some of you've got them, and you had to work to get them. Are you going to give them to him for nothing? No. You're going to make him work for them. So he's going to work by the sweat of his brow, and then he's going to come back with $1,001 bills or whatever he's got. He says, Bruce, here's the $1,000 I owe you. And he walks out of my bank a freeman. He was in debt before, therefore he was my slave. Is that right?
Amen.
Sure. Proverbs 22:7, the rich ruleth the poor, and the borrower is the slave to the lender. If that's not so, God lied. Now, he was my slave during the loan period. But you say, what good did it do you? Well, let's see. I take the $1,000, and I go over to Mr. Pendergrass and say, I'd like to have you build me an outhouse just like his. I like it. What's it going to cost me? $1,000. What did $1,000 cost me? Nothing. What did the outhouse cost me? Nothing. I can live on 0% interest as long as I can do 100% confiscation. Couldn't you? Why was I able to get the outhouse for free? Because he and the rest of you non-bankers work by the sweat of your brow to impart value to my worthless notes. And so long as I can get you to work for them, I don't have to. Now, would you rather be a banker? I'm not talking about the manager of a bank. I mean, the manager of the bank, his labor is confiscated by the bank too. And he doesn't understand that. Let's run the scenario by one more time. This time we're going to charge a little interest. Make the simple illustration. This is the only community in the U.S. This is all the people there are. And I've got the only bank. And I'm going to make the only loan that's ever been made this year. He wants to borrow $1,000. I loan him $1,000, and I said I'm going to have to charge you 1 cent interest because you've taken a loan before, and we're going to have to curb these excesses of yours. Okay. He borrows the $1,000, spends the $1,000, gets the outhouse, and then he earns the $1,000 from you people again because he's got to pay me back. What does he have to pay me? $1,000 and 1 cent. Question: where does the 1 cent come from to pay the interest on the $1,000 loan? Doesn't exist. You see, it wasn't borrowed into circulation yet. And until I loan it into circulation, it's impossible for him to earn it. Because it is impossible to repay to a sole source more than you got from it. And the banking system is the sole source of numbers that people call dollars in America. They don't come from any other place. That's where they originate. Dollars are created. Numbers of absolutely nothing called dollars are created by the banks, local banks and the Federal Reserve Bank. They are not created any other place. Now, if they put them out at interest, how can you pay them back more than what they put into circulation? Can't do it. What does that do? It makes debt perpetual. Because somebody has to borrow that 1 penny into circulation so that he can earn it. And when they borrow that 1 penny into circulation, it goes into circulation at interest. Someone is always in debt. The hook has been set. Can't get off the hook. People say, oh, we'll just pay off our debts, and then we'll go back to an honest money system. In this system, you don't just pay off your debts and walk away. Because if you pay off yours, that means that he won't be able to pay off his. It's impossible. See, my grandparents bought a slogan: a chicken in every pot and 2 cars in every garage. Or maybe it was the other way around, a car in every garage and 2 chickens in every pot. I don't know. How are we going to do that? Easy. Take a loan. Low interest loans. And the banks could make low interest loans because they created the money that they were going to loan out of thin air. They got us on the hook, the fiscal heroin. Then they raised the price of the fiscal heroin. They started to withdraw it from us. And we went into anxiety attacks and so forth. Foreclosure. Why? Because there weren't enough numbers in circulation to pay off the existing principal plus interest. It's mathematically impossible. It can't be done. Our grandparents, yours and mine, I think we're about the same age, went into debt, and they sold our parents into bondage because our parents had to continually take out loans so that my grandparents could pay off the principal and the interest. If my parents' generation refused to do that, then my grandparents' generation would be foreclosed upon. Our parents did just as they were told. They took loans, and they sold us into bondage. And unless our generation continues to go to the bank and borrow more of these fictitious numbers into circulation, the banks will foreclose on our parents. And if the Fed tries to tighten the funny money supply, what happens? Foreclosure. How many foreclosures in 1981? 519,063. In the land of the free and home of the brave. It's impossible to pay them all off. Debt becomes perpetual. Who says? Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Two faces of debt. Last page, page 23. Quote, existing debt will be refinanced over and over again. It doesn't say it ought to be. It doesn't say it should be. It says it will be. And if you refinance a debt, are you out of debt? You're still in debt. Last paragraph. Debt, public and private, is here to stay. What does the Bible say debt is? Slavery. That's why we entitle one of our books, Credit is Debt, is Slavery. Someone might ask, well, who's in debt to whom? People tell us that the federal government is in debt, trillions of dollars. To whom and what was borrowed? The federal government doesn't owe anybody anything if there was no loan made. See, the court had ruled in Neifert versus White, U.S. versus Neifert White Company, there it is, U.S. versus Neifert White Company, I knew I'd get it. In order to constitute a loan, there must be a contract whereby, in substance, one party transfers to another a sum of money. What did we borrow from the local bank? Denominated in dollars. No thing. Someone would ask, well, are banks a safe place to keep our money? No, because the bank stole our money. I got talking with a banker in the Bahamas. Again, seems like I'm always talking about the Bahamas, but this guy, he's the manager of the Royal Bank of Canada on an out island. I won't name the island. Might protect the innocent. He asked me if I collect coins. I said, sure, if they're made out of gold and silver. And I thought, aha, here's a chance to witness to a born-again Christian by his own admission. I passed him a little tiny coin, smaller than what we call a dime. I said, if I deposit this little coin here in your bank, what will you give me for a credit on the books? He spied it kind of carefully, and he said, well, out of curiosity, I'll credit you with $1. That was gold, and it weighed $1. He's going to credit me with $1. Anybody here want to get all you can for $1, right? I hand him this 90% silver cartwheel, $1 of silver, not a silver dollar, no such thing as a silver dollar. $1 of silver. He says, same thing, I'll credit you with $1. I handed him one that was made out of 40% silver. He says, same thing, I'll credit you with $1. I then handed him one that was made out of copper and nickel, the 8-cent 100-cent piece. Doesn't make sense, does it? He says, same thing, I'll credit you with $1. A 3-cent 100-cent piece. But they don't cost anything, actually. That's what it cost you and I to get them, if we made them. And then a 2-cent, or actually a no-cent 100-cent piece. 6 different items all claim to be, measure, or weigh $1. And on paper, they all look exactly the same, 1.00. If you close out the account, folks, what do you think you're going to get? Gold? Silver? 40% silver? Copper, nickel? Or paper? That's exactly what he said I was going to get. He says, you'll get paper. I said, what kind? He says, you'll get a $5 bill and a $1 bill. 5 plus 1 equals 6. 6 what? And I asked him, do you think that's fair? Honest? Do you think that's good? He tried to change the subject, and he wanted to start talking about sailing. Why do you want to change the subject? James tells us in 4:17, he who knows what is right and does not do it, to him it is sin. I got an idea that we had a born-again Christian that was coming under conviction that maybe banking, even though he was a manager of a bank, wasn't all it was cut out to be. He told me later he'd been thinking about getting out of banking anyway. I wrote a letter to a bank back in Maine, and I asked them if I deposited a $20 weight of gold, a double eagle weight. What will you give me for a credit? Will you identify the weight of the substance and the quantity, or just the quantity? The manager of the bank wrote back and said, we can only identify the quantity on deposit. We don't identify the substance. Some warehouse, huh? Can you imagine taking 2,000 pounds of red snapper down to the warehouse and having a guy giving you a warehouse receipt that said 2,000 pounds of fish? What do you think you're going to get when you go back? Cod, catfish, sculpin, jellyfish, starfish. See, fishermen aren't that stupid. Only when it comes to money are we all that stupid. Well, live and learn. Let's talk about taxes for just a moment. I'm sure there are a few people here that are probably concerned a little bit about taxes, and we'll turn to the back page, the triple tax of your handout sheet. The triple tax. I'm not talking about taxes that are paid at the local level, the state level, and the federal level. I'm talking about 3 ways we get the kibosh from the same people. It says here, if taxes are burdensome to you, then perhaps it's because you're paying thrice. First, by giving up real wealth, that's your labor or your production, to get the notes, erroneously called money, that the federal government gets for free. If I got those for nothing, and you had to give me 100 cents of your labor to get it, what percentage of confiscation have I taken you for a ride with? 100%. I could live on that. I guarantee. The second tax is when we hold the notes and suffer a depreciation in proportion to the time we hold them. And the third tax is when we feel compelled to return some of these tax receipts, because that's all it is, a receipt for tax already paid, to the same federal government that got them for nothing in the first place. You know, the government doesn't really need your notes. They print quite a few of them. Do you know how many they print a day? I mean, don't throw out a huge figure, but, you know, like a trillion or something like that. Do you have any idea how many notes, Federal Reserve notes, the government prints a day?
6,000 an hour.
Well, I haven't taken it on an hourly basis, but I got a little publication here. You may be right, too. Bureau of Engraving and Printing. Production of government securities. What's a security? It's an IOU. A bond, a note, treasury bill. Those are all IOUs. Are IOUs security? I would think that an asset would be a security and an IOU would be an insecurity. You see what they do with words? The principal product of the Bureau is United States paper currency, averaging approximately 16 million notes a day. And it doesn't make any difference if it's a 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50, or $100 bill. They get them all for nothing. Why would they need yours? Yours have got wrinkles and tears and coffee stains and no telling what else on them. The ones they print are brand new, crisp, and sheets. Roll them, boys! 7 days a week, 16 million notes a day. They don't need yours and mine. We couldn't send them to Malfunction Junction as fast as they can print them. They're way ahead of us. Okay, first tax. When the Treasury admits that they get these notes, any denomination, for less than 2 cents, and I assure you they get them for no cents, but give them the benefit of the doubt, then who can deny that he or she hasn't already paid a tax equal to whatever was given up to get the note? Isn't that what Washington operates on? They don't build buildings down there out of Federal Reserve notes. They build them with labor, steel, glass, concrete, etc. And they got that for free. And that's how they get it for free. They take the license to steal and they give it to somebody who's dumb enough to go out and work for a living to earn a note that the government got for nothing. That's why they keep urging us in school to go out and earn a living. And that's what they call earning a living, getting robbed. Second tax, holding a $100 note from, say, January to December, it says 1982 here, but it would apply to this year, I suspect as well, will allow you to rob your neighbor of only about 80% of what was stolen from you. Anybody deny that? If you get a $100 bill in January and you wait until December to spend it, you're going to only get about 80 bucks worth out of that note. Where did the other 20 go? Into the atmosphere? I mean, we're using a compressed gas as money? And you open the valve and some of it kind of... That's the depreciation tax. Now, people call it inflation. And some say that inflation is a tax. Well, it's an expense, all right. We'll go to Money in Colonial New England, Federal Reserve Bank of Boston, page 33, and they're going to refer us to the Continental Notes, but it applies today, the Continental Notes. They said here that many congressmen realized that paper money itself was nothing but a form of disguised taxation. You notice they didn't say that taking this away from you was taxation. They said that was taxation. Said one legislator, quote, "The natural, unavoidable tax of depreciation is the most certain, expeditious, and equal tax that could be devised. Every possessor of money has paid a tax in proportion to the time he held it." Isn't that true? Convert your house and your automobile into those things and wait 10 years and see what you've got. And you're going to take one heck of a depreciation. The longer you hold it, the more you lose. That's not money, by the way. By the way, there's no such thing as paper money either. No such thing. Paper is too heavy to be used as money. You could never use paper as money. Isn't that right? That's why the numbers on the piece of paper do not represent quantities of paper. Can you imagine going down to the Ford garage and you say you'd like to buy a new Mercury, a new Lincoln? 20 grand, maybe. So then you go down to Scott Paper Company and you tell them down there at Scott Paper you want 20,000 bucks of toilet tissue. And the guy look at you kind of funny. He says, "You got a problem of some sort?" No, not yet. "No, I just want to take this paper down. I want to buy my new Lincoln with paper." You got any idea how much paper you'd need to take $20,000 worth of toilet tissue? The numbers on a piece of paper have no connection whatsoever to paper. There's no such thing as paper money. When you say paper money, that assumes that paper is being used as money, just as if you said that metal was being used as money, like gold or silver. Paper is too heavy to be used as money. Third tax. No, correction, I'm going to stay on inflation. Sorry. Keynes on inflation again. We're going to go back to page 6, 1980 Annual Report, Federal Reserve Bank of Richmond. We're going to quote the Fed, quoting Keynes, quoting Ulyanov, Lenin. Lenin is said to have declared that the best way to destroy the capitalist system was to debauch the currency. By a continuing process of inflation, governments can confiscate, secretly and unobserved, an important part of the wealth of their citizens. We get people that honestly believe that Ronald Reagan wants to cure inflation. I see no reason, folks, why anybody in Washington should want to cure inflation. That's how they live. By this method, they not only confiscate, sounds like a free country, doesn't it? But they confiscate arbitrarily. And while the process impoverishes many, it actually enriches some. I believe it. I'm kind of interested in sailboats, and my wife and I would spend a little bit of time going around the boatyards and then go to some of the factories like Paul Luke Boatyard over in Booth Bay, Maine, making nice aluminum yachts, maybe $500,000 apiece. Backlog 3 years. And that was back when most of our friends couldn't even afford to go out and get a Chevette, when money was tight, whatever money is. Backlog 3 years on aluminum yachts, 50 feet, 60 feet. It actually enriches some. It's got to. Lenin was certainly right. There is no subtler, no surer means of overturning the existing basis of society than to debauch the currency. And we've got people that watch the TV the day after, and they're worried about the Soviet Union sending ICBMs over here to do what? Bomb their food supply? Why would you do that? Lenin has already told us the best way to overturn this country was to debauch the currency. Why would you want to bomb the country you've just overturned? They've already got it. The process engages all the hidden forces of economic law on the side of destruction, and does it in a manner which not one man in a million is able to diagnose. Bombs are easy to figure out. That's not so easy. That's why the room isn't full. That's why there aren't nearly as many people that know as much about the monetary fraud in this country as think they know about the ICBM crisis by watching The Day After and that very official CFR Trilateral Commission interview that took place with Henry Kissinger talking with Bob McNamara. You know, what do you say, Henry? Well, I don't know. I think I'm going to say the same thing you said. Everybody there was from the CFR. Have a club meeting. Make it look as though we're having a debate. I think you're right. I think you're very right. I think you're extremely right. I disagree with that. I think you're a prophet. Page 10. Keynes argues that inflation is, quote, a method of taxation, quote, which the government uses to, quote, secure the command over real resources, resources just as real as those obtained by ordinary taxation. What is raised by printing notes is just as much taken from the public as is a beer duty or an income tax. You notice what they said there? Keynes, the boy who helped get us into this mess. He says what is raised by printing the note, not taking it away from you. What is raised by printing the note is as much taken from you as is a beer duty or income tax. All you got to do is to print it, and they've taken something from you. And people think, oh, we get rid of the income tax, boy, and this country is going to go free. Baloney. Regarding the inflation tax, he says, quote, a government can live by this means when it can live by no other. It is the form of taxation which the public find hardest to evade, and even the weakest government can enforce when it can enforce nothing else. I hope you understand the gravity of what we're saying here, folks. The income tax is nothing compared to that. So we look at the third tax. Returning a portion of your notes, which in reality are tax receipts. That's why I want to keep mine. Because when we foreclose on the Fed, I want to take my tax receipts down to them and I want to get my gold. Heck, the government takes away all of our receipts, so we can't even have anything to go claim the money that was stolen from us. Returning a portion of your notes to the government reduces the amount of that counterfeit that you can bid in the marketplace to get your own production. And the government gets your production. It doesn't have to produce all that much extra. And it conceals the fraud from the American people that the government doesn't pay for anything. I'm a taxpayer. I pay your salary. Baloney. There are no taxpayers in the United States because if there were, you would have a means of paying the tax. You cannot pay a tax in money. There is no money with which to pay a tax. If the government printed those, it certainly doesn't need them back. If you printed books, like I had books printed of mine, I don't ask for them back. Do I? Of course not. John Maynard Keynes revealed this fraud in his book, Economic Consequences of the Peace, and he has the quote, I have the quotation here, quote, if government should refrain from regulation, how do they regulate us? By taxing us. They take away 100% of what you think you earn, you're regulated. They take away 50% of it, you're half regulated. They take away none of it, well, you're not too badly regulated, but you're still regulated. If government should refrain from regulation, the worthlessness of the money, it's really not money, becomes apparent, and the fraud upon the public can be concealed no longer. So Amos Bruce wrote a letter to Representative Ron Paul back in 1979. Anybody seen a copy of that letter that Ron Paul wrote back to Amos Bruce, telling him that it wasn't necessary? Yeah, wasn't necessary for the government to tax anybody? Amos asked, is it necessary for the government to tax us? Ron Paul writes and he says, it is not technically necessary for the federal government to tax anyone directly. It could simply print the money it wants, and you can't print money. That's another flaw. It could print the bogus notes, but it can't print money. It could simply print the money it wants, but that would be too bold a stroke, and the public would catch on as to what kind of a counterfeiting operation we're running, he said. It's so obvious. Banks charge interest on loans to conceal the fact that they create the principal out of thin air. Banks charge taxes, like income taxes, etc., to conceal from us the fact that they get everything they want for free. Counterfeiters are found out very quickly. But if a counterfeiter would smarten up and start printing the bills in his basement and then try to earn them back, people would figure that, gee, he can't be counterfeiting them, he wants them back. But counterfeiters never figured out what to do. The government's been way ahead of us. And we have pastors, bless their souls. I don't know how many times we've gone from church to church. Render unto Caesar, they tell us. Number one, we don't have a Caesar in America. First off, if we were to draw a block diagram of what this country looked like, we would have God first, man, which is a creation of God, and underneath that we would have the Constitution, which binds the bureaucrat. Okay? If you obey those in authority over you, who's in authority? God. Then those of us who wrote the document. Man's not in authority. He just thinks he is. I have discrepancies with people that get too pig-headed on the constitutional aspects of, how sovereign we are. Actually, we're not sovereign. Even the Apostle Paul was a bondservant of Christ. This is where the law is written, and this is where we find the freedom. It's also a very confusing and baffling document, too, when you come right down to it. What keeps the system going? Faith. We'll take only one book on this. Take many. Gold. Federal Reserve Bank of Philadelphia, page 10. Through guarantees that paper money could be exchanged for something of intrinsic value, gold served to inspire a measure of confidence in the system. Without the confidence factor, many believe a paper money system is liable to collapse eventually. That's the hardest job that a central bank has, that's the hardest job that a counterfeiter has, is maintaining the confidence in bad checks and bad notes. And they're working diligently day and night. Why, we even watch the newscasters. And you'll even have women that'll come and give you the economic news for the day. The dollar sank against the yen today in heavy trading. The mark advanced against the franc, and the pound is steady today in moderate trading. They do that with a straight face. So we could come on and we could do an analogy. The inch sank against the mile today in heavy trading. The cubic yard was steady in light trading today, and the ton advanced over the pound in moderate to heavy trading. That's all for today. Watch us tomorrow for the next inquisitorial broadcast. It's just absurd. They do that with a straight face, and we watch it with a straight face. What are the consequences? Well, the consequences for this madness are pretty much what they experienced in Germany. Oh joy, we're going to get to Germany. In the 1920s. Go to a comic book, The Story of Money. Page 20, and they've got a picture in here of a gentleman warming his hand over a fireplace, and he's burning up all kinds of notes. And he says here, nothing like cold cash to make a hot fire. Well, the notes weren't cash. They were supposed to be redeemable in cash, but they didn't have enough cash to redeem the notes. But it says here, the story of money is punctuated by episodes of inflation that destroyed money's value. Germany saw the worst inflation of any modern industrial country only 50 years ago, when the value of its paper money fell so low that currency was a cheaper fuel than firewood. I keep asking my tax collectors, what are you going to do when your currency note is cheaper than firewood? We've got some German notes here. But we'll refer to another publication dealing with the German notes. We'll deal with steering a course between inflation and unemployment. That's like steering a course between a rock and a hard place. That's the alternative we seem to have from the Fed. This book was written by the Vice President and Secretary, Mr. Lawrence C. Murdoch. And on page 8, he tells us something rather interesting. Quote, in the 3 years prior to December 1923, German wholesale prices rose more than 1 trillion times. Inflation accelerated so fast that many restaurant patrons paid in advance, because if they waited until they finished eating, the price of the meal might double. Now, he told us that in the text. He wrote that verbatim as a caption, and they had a little picture in here of a chap with a suitcase full of notes, and he's handing a fistful of them to the restaurateur. We've been told 3 times on the same page. I don't think he's kidding. I asked a friend of mine back in Calais who ran a similar shop to ours. I said, if I came into your sandwich shop and the price of a sandwich was $1, by the time you went down to the other end of the counter to make the sandwich, the price of the sandwich was $2. By the time I got back to the debt register, which most people still call a cash register, the price was now $4. By the time I took the sandwich to the door, the price was now up to $8. By the time I got to the car, it was up to $16. By the time I got it unwrapped and started to eat it, the price should be $32. What would you charge me for the sandwich? He didn't know. Don't blame him. You see, when things start rolling that fast, you close your shop because you lose less by closing than by staying open. Remember? $8,000 to buy a keg of whiskey. $12,000 just to sell the empty barrel back. Do you suppose the merchant knew enough to charge, I don't know how many thousand more, for each glass so that he can at least afford the barrel when it comes back with or without whiskey? Trade stops. And that's what the Federal Reserve has alluded to. I probably won't be able to find the book. I've been so hasty up here with publications. But in the national debt on page 8, they told us that the power to create money also allows governments to pursue policies that could lead to more disastrous results than bankruptcy. What would be worse than national bankruptcy? How about when the farmers out in Wichita no longer want to take Federal Reserve notes to get the wheat? Folks, that means us folks in the cities get no Wheaties. It may happen. In fact, there's something else that's kind of interesting here. Beneficiaries seldom bother to collect on life insurance policies because the proceeds often were worth less than the current price of a stamp to notify the company. I'll show you a rundown of some German notes. These are taken from our little album, a little collection we have. A 1 mark note. A 1 mark note in 1914 is supposed to be equivalent to 25 cents in silver, U.S. That should therefore have been a claim, I suppose, to a 25-cent quantity of silver in Germany. Didn't take very long, however, before you needed larger denomination notes, but in 1914 you could acquire a pound of butter for 1.5 marks of money, or even no money. 1918, just 4 years later, it took 3 marks of money or no money, either one, to get a pound of butter. In 1922, 4 years later again, it took 2,400 marks. But in the summer of the same year, it took 150,000, and in the winter, it took a mere 6 billion. I've got a 1958 encyclopedic dictionary by Webster's, and they do a nice job on inflation, and they tell us how a person could retire and live off the interest of 50,000 marks in the bank. 50,000 marks of what? I don't know. But you could live off the interest. But by 1923, the full principal sum wouldn't get you a pound of butter. You see, we've got people that are all wound up over CDs. Oh, I'm making 13%. Big deal. The principal that you think you've got in there, first off, doesn't exist. But even if it did, it's depreciating at the rate of about 20% a year. You're making 13% and losing 20% to start with. Then the government's going to turn around and charge you a tax on the 13% you think you're making. You're actually taking a loss of about 7% a year, and the government's going to charge you a tax if you make it a full 20. People think they're smart. And eventually they're going to have all kinds of numbers sitting down there. What's on deposit? Modern money mechanics will tell you. Quote, deposits are merely book entries. That's the whole sentence. That's all there are in a bank. If you wanted to steal money from this bank, you didn't want to steal Federal Reserve notes. What you need to steal from this bank is their books. That's right. If you want to steal the money from this bank, you've got to steal their books, because the book entries are what we're using as money. A 1,000 mark note. This one here is a 50 million mark note, 50 million N, if you want to speak a little Deutsch. These notes are pretty good because on the backs there was nothing printed. So you had plenty of room to write the Pizza Hut telephone number and stuff like that. So you at least had something useful. This is one of my favorite notes here. This is a 1,000 mark note. The number 1,000 down here. I guess that means 1,000 there. 1,000. 1,000 mark. But that wasn't very good. You see, 1,000 marks wouldn't get you very much by the time this note was printed, so they overprinted it in kind of a pale orange color. 1 million mark. What's the denomination now?
1 million.
Million. How'd they do that? Just print it on. Nothing to it. In fact, if 1 million marks wouldn't get you much, they could just print it in another way. 1 trillion. If you start losing faith in a system like that, and faith is very important. The hats the Federal Reserve wears, page 4. All of the paper money issued today, no such thing as paper money, is Federal Reserve notes. The real backing for the nation's money is faith. Now we've got something to hang on to, haven't we? Hebrews 11:1 tells us what faith is. Now faith is the substance of things hoped for and the conviction of things not seen. Faith. You see, Webster's in dualistic thinking says that if something isn't material, it's spiritual. And I've got a letter right up here from the Central Bank of the Bahamas, from the governor, the guy whose signature is on the notes. And he tells me currency has no materiality and money has no materiality. We're not using anything as currency or money. What are we using then? Faith. It's a spiritual battle. Remember that we talked about the price of a postage stamp? We talked with some people over in Chicago after the meeting. A gentleman said, I know a guy who had 50,000 marks in the bank. 50,000 marks, so he didn't know what. And he said, in a bank. And the bank sent him a check for 200,000 and said, your account isn't worth keeping open. Isn't that nice? The price of the stamp was 2 million marks. There's a postage stamp for 1 million, 4 million, 10 million, 50 million marks for a postage stamp. The 2 million mark stamp used to be a 200 mark stamp, and they overprinted that, 2 million, because 200 marks wouldn't have gotten you the postage. We have people that'll tell us, that we're heading for a cashless society. I've heard it from the pulpits. Haven't you? Yeah. Are we? We've already been there. When? Starting in 1965, the United States went 100% cashless. And we go to church to have someone shepherd us and to tell us of future pontifications from the book of Revelation. And most of them are even oblivious to what took place how many years ago? I bet you thought. Page 7. I could have asked you how many people here have cashed a check recently, but I'm not going to ask you that question. Banks don't keep cash in checking accounts. How could you cash a check? You can't. Banks don't keep cash in checking accounts and don't transfer currency or coin when acting on a check's instruction. What do? Checkbook balances are transferred between accounts as bookkeeping entries only. We're heading for a cashless society? No, Pastor. Started 100% pure cashless, 1965. Peter, feed my sheep. Feed them with food, because we have many who would be deceivers, and many will approach him and say, Lord, Lord, did we not prophesy in your name? And he'll say, get away from me. I know you're not. We're deficit spending. Have you ever tried to spend a deficit? If we spend gold by percentage, how much could we spend? 100%. All you got. If we were going to monetize silver and spend it by percentage, how much could we spend? 100%. If we monetize deficits, which by definition is a deficiency of amount, by percentage, how much can you spend? Well, yeah, we say infinity, but I've written to one of my congressmen. I said, Congressman, when we run out of deficits, we're going to be broke. And I want to know where the end is. The government doesn't need us. This year they're going to spend what? Over $200 billion more than they took from us? If they needed us, they couldn't have spent the $200 billion that we didn't send them. Why don't they give us a year off and say, we're going to spend $700 billion you don't send us, and nobody send us anything? The reason they don't do that is because we'd catch on. And we'd have this room full. Supply and demand. No such thing. Right? No such law. I'm going to have to hit that because I broached the subject earlier. Let's define the terms. Supply. What is supply? Economic definition of supply is all goods and services available in the marketplace, available for purchase. Right? What is demand? The desire for a product accompanied by method of payment. A gentleman up there's got a nice necktie. I said, I'd like to buy your necktie. He says, fine. I'd like to buy it with a vest. Fair enough? He says, sure. From my perspective, his necktie is supply. It's goods and services available for purchase, right? So the necktie is supply. What am I going to use as demand? The vest. But he looks at me and he says, gee, that vest is a supply that I want to buy. What's he going to use as demand? The necktie. The necktie and the vest are both supply and demand at the same time. Can supply exceed demand? Can't be done. Same thing. If I burn this vest, I burn an equal quantity of supply and demand. Now, it's only supply and demand at the time of trade or transaction. Once the transaction has been made, Merrill Jenkins told us, it's now inventory. Period. There is a law of competitive bidding, but not a law of supply and demand. Now, that's something that everybody believes. I mean, they believe that like the Ten Commandments. In fact, they believe that more than they believe the Ten Commandments. Okay. I guess we won't hit any more little miscellaneous topics. We could go on a little longer, but I don't want to keep you all night. The bottom line, my little silver swine, my little unclean beast there, says, I wouldn't mind being poor if it wasn't for being so short of cash. The reason we have monetary problems in America is because there's no money in circulation. Now, that's got to be the first problem. Once we solve that problem, we'll probably have a few others, but I think a lot of our other ones will go away. We've got to watch our language. The Tower of Babel, or Babel, however you pronounce it, was discontinued for what reason? People lost the facility of communication. We've lost the facility of communication. You see, language is nothing more than a common law tool that we use to convey ideas. The banking system has been using language as a means of concealing ideas. I hope you will agree with me with that. Let's get into a few positive solutions so we can wind up on a positive note. One, learn. Simple. You're doing something about the problem because you're here studying the problem. Every problem has a solution. The more you know about the problem, the easier the solution is going to come to you. And you're going to be changing, if you haven't already, and I imagine you've already ended up changing your way of life as a result of just the association with people here. Hopefully when you leave this place tonight, if you have a checking account, you'll give thoughts to not having one. If you thought about going to a bank and taking a loan, you might think about not taking a loan because you're not going to get a loan anyway. Every buck you put in the account allows the bank to create now approximately another 30 bucks that it never had. Does that make your $1 in your account worth more or worth less? Through a law of competitive bidding. We dig our own grave. Number two, tell others. You have a responsibility to tell others, in fact, because your neighbors think you're crazy. I know that. I've already met people like you, and I've met their neighbors, and they think you're nuts for even being here. But you see, you have of necessity, you have to tell your neighbor, because your neighbor is the one that's going to put you in jail if you do anything rash like not file 1040s. IRS can't put you in jail yet. They get your neighbor to do that. This tax protester won't pay his taxes, therefore you've got to pay twice as much. Boy, I'm not going to pay twice as much. I'm going to get that son of a gun. And you've lost it. You got to get to that guy before IRS gets to him, because there's no connection whatsoever with what you submit to Malfunction Junction and what they spend. That's why they're going to spend $200 billion more this year than they took from you. There's no connection. No connection whatsoever. That's how I got involved in this thing. I thought I was spending most of my time earning the bucks back that I thought I was paying to government. There's no connection. I've tendered silver to government and tried to get a refund of the silver. I knew there was no refund coming. And they tell me my claim is meritless. They can't refund the silver because the silver was lost at the bank. The bank stole it. I knew that anyway. What you pay to the government has no connection with what the government spends. But most people don't know that. You see, Cain asked a question. He says, what am I, my brother's keeper? You betcha. In Ezekiel 33, 6 and 9, God speaking to the prophet Ezekiel had something to say about seeing the sword coming. He said, if you see the sword coming and you don't issue the warning, then the blood will be on your head. Now, if you see the sword coming and you warn the people and they heed not, then the blood is on their head. You see, folks, as Christians, your responsibility is to at least shift the responsibility. Start shifting. 3, separate from the evil. Come out from amongst them and be ye separate, saith the Lord. If you're doing business with someone that is doing unlawful practices, you separate. If you discover that the bank is committing fraud, don't take my word for it. You may still believe in local banks. I don't care if you do or not. Yes, I do. I really do. Get these books. Ask your local banker what it is that he's going to loan you. Substance for substance. You'll pay him back. If he'll tell you what the substance is you borrowed, tell him you'd be perfectly willing to return exactly the same substance that's referred to on these checks denominated as dollars. Even throw in a little interest. You don't mind. Your imagination is as good as his. Maybe familiar with the 60 Minutes program that was on a couple of years ago where Mike Wallace was given permission by a couple in California to review their checking account and find out what he could about them? Okay? Correct me if I'm wrong now. I'm not going to make a misstatement because I didn't see the program. I had a pastor tell me about it. Mike Wallace was able to determine where they went to work, how much they earned, where they went on vacation, how long they stayed on vacation, how much they spent on vacation, where the children went to school, as a private school, what the tuition was, what the political affiliation would be of the people, because obviously your campaign contributions and so forth, and to all your political action committees, that's recorded. In fact, if you go to a restaurant these days and use a Visa card or a MasterCard, then you've got an itemized tab that says you ate a cheeseburger and that you drank a milkshake. You staple that thing to your to the restaurateur's copy, and if Internal Revenue wants to, they can find out what you eat for lunch. Even the birth control method that was employed by the couple in question. There is nothing, nothing, nothing that cannot be found out about you through your checks. And in a free country, you have the right to privacy, because there are things that we do in our bathrooms that we close the door, don't we? Unless you join the army. You join the army, and then there's just got a room like this, and it's just full of toilets. No walls. And you know, you don't feel like a free person in the army. Because you're not. Privacy is something that a free person is entitled to. You have none with a checking account. If you don't mind the banks creating numbers on top of your numbers, that's fine. You play with them. But you're entitled to privacy. I got nothing to hide. Oh, yes, you do. Because everything you do is going to be used against you someday. Amen. You live long enough, and you'll see. Page 59, electronic money. Money is information. It's no longer a means of storing value. It's information about you. 4, seek no privileges. A license is a privilege. Review the licensing concept. A lot of Christian schools and so forth are getting into the licensing issue. Rather heavy. People like Pastor Sullivan. And when they start arresting all their parishioners, you know, they're down there. We watch that on film. They're praying down between the pews. Anybody see that film? Yeah. And the cops just go right in there and just lug them out and padlock the church. Free country, sure. Nebraska. Yeah. Why'd they do that? Incorporated church. Corporation is a privilege. Funny thing, back in Maine, our Constitution says in Article 1, Section 23, no privileges shall ever be granted or confirmed. And they told me they were going to suspend my driver's privilege. I said, which one? According to the Constitution of Maine, you can't even grant any. How are you going to suspend any? No answer. How many people here knew that when they applied for a driver's license, they waived all their constitutional rights on the highway? How many people knew that? John Voss of NCBA, a very nice man, over in Colorado. You'd look at him, you'd swear he could never be arrested for anything. He was arrested for speeding. He thought he'd go into court and he was going to represent himself. had a lady judge. They're getting to be very common in this country. You know, I'm going to give you women and children to rule over you. I don't think that's a blessing. I think that's a curse.
Amen.
Lady judge understands where he's going with his argument. He's proceeding, pro se, on his own. She says, Mr. Voss, I think I know where you're going with that. She says, you're going to attempt to prove that the police officer did not afford you any constitutional protection on the highway. Well, yes, that's right. That's what I was going to do. She says, you don't have any. What's that? You don't have any. You applied for the driver's license. You know, we pride ourselves with full disclosure. Truth in lending. Truth in lending. Banks never tell you what they lend you. They tell you how much it's going to cost to borrow what they didn't lend you, but they never identify what it was they loaned. And when you apply for a license, you're expected to waive your constitutional rights, the rights that our ancestors fought, bled, and died for, to preserve for their children, who I hope is us. There's something wrong. You have a right to travel, folks. It's even enumerated in Black's Law Dictionary. I drive without a driver's license. In fact, the vehicle we operate is untitled, unregistered, uninspected, and uninsured, and I have no driver's license. Motor vehicle has 340 pages of material, single-space typewritten from me explaining why. I haven't done anything in a corner. Even made full-page ads in our local paper explaining what we were doing. Published public notices in 4 newspapers and told them that we're operating without a registration. Protect our right to travel. Sent certified mail to the sheriff of our county and the chief of police in our city and the chief of police, state police. We're operating an unregistered vehicle. All we get back is a little green card that says they got the mail. 8 months later, we write them again. Send them a copy of Credit is Dead as Slavery. And about a 5 or 6 page letter, hey folks, protect our right to travel. The little green card comes back from the sheriff and the chief of police city and the chief of police state. Would they send a policeman to see me? No. Why not? Don't know. Crazy. What a country. I thought I lived in a free country. When you apply for the license, you waive your common law rights. That's why when you're stopped on the highway, let me see your registration and your license. No Fourth Amendment protection there. Anything you're going to say is going to be used against you. And they take you into what kind of a court? Quasi-criminal. What is an almost criminal court? Is this a crime? No, it's a quasi-crime. What's an almost crime? You're going to accept an almost payment for an almost fine for an almost crime? That's so they can circumvent your Fifth Amendment protection, because your Fifth Amendment only protects you from being a witness against yourself, not self-incrimination, but from being a witness against you in a criminal case, not a civil case. And anything that involves the government is criminal, because a criminal jurisdiction is government versus citizen. A civil jurisdiction is between citizen and citizen. What is quasi-criminal? Almost. It's like almost pregnant, yeah. Seek no legislation. We don't need any more laws. In fact, this country operated in the first 100 years on the laws that we didn't have in the second 100 years. And I think we could probably operate the next 100 years if we just wiped out all the laws that we've written in the last 100. Probably do a very good job of it. 5, don't give unlawful statutes the force of law. The only thing that keeps Caesar going is when we believe that Caesar is God. See, we don't have a Caesar. Caesar means God, man. Caesar was not just head of the state. Caesar was head of the church and the state. Remember, it was Caesar Caligula who declared himself to be a god while he was still alive. Up until Caligula, Caesar had to die. And then the Senate, I guess, declared that he was now a god. Well, Caligula must have read the scriptures. You know, it's appointed that all men should die once and then judgment. We figured, I'm going to die. So he said, what the heck, I'm going to declare myself to be a god now. That way I can see what the bust of me is going to look like downtown with all the other gods. He married his sister. He wanted to keep it all in the family. So he declared her to be a goddess while they were still alive. Do you think Ronald Reagan could declare himself a god in this country? Do you think the public would maybe make some sort of an outcry? I bet even the moral majority might go after that. We have no Caesar. Render unto Caesar that which is Caesar's, unto God that which is God's. Fine. And Jesus, what does he do? He insults Caesar by saying, whose picture is that? There couldn't have been anybody age 7 and older who didn't know whose picture that was. Why, that's a picture of the King of Kings. Caesar was it, wasn't it? Can you name a higher power other than God? Can you imagine if every time we change presidents, every coin bore the inscription or superscription of the president? And some guy walks along with a white, whatever, garment of some sort, and sandals, and he says, whose picture is that? Everybody knows whose picture that is. What an insult. Taxes to whom taxes are due, it says in Romans 13. Very important word, due, D-U-E. It means justly owing. So far as I know, there isn't a tax that is justly owed, city, county, state, or federal, denominated in dollars of the money of account, or United States money, as they now call it. There's no money in circulation. There are no taxes that are due. I'm sorry. All public officers are still required to keep their accounts current in the money of account, because even the rewriting of 31 U.S.C. 371, which is now 31 U.S.C. 5101, do you get any idea what kind of a rewriting they've done in Title 31? They have completely rewritten Title 31. Why? Because of people like you and me. We've given them too much trouble. So they start rewriting the statutes, which is fine. It admits that they're guilty. But it still says the money, United States money, is expressed in dollars. Dear public official, I want to know what's current as money, and you tell me what it is, and I'm going to make you a reward. I'm going to give you £1 of it absolutely free if you tell me what's current as money that's expressed in dollars. 6. Become self-employed. If you work for somebody else, you're in a bind, because you're going to be pitted between a rock and a hard place. You end up fighting with Internal Revenue, and Internal Revenue sends a notice to your employer, please excuse that word, to withhold, to garnishee. And what do you end up doing? You end up suing your boss. You already had enough of a fight fighting IRS. Now you're going to fight with your boss. Might just as well turn to the back pages of Popular Mechanics and find yourself a little job that you can do at home. I've got a patriot friend in Virginia who's 48 years old, I think, this year, and he's in the rubber stamp business, and he doesn't file 1040s, doesn't have a Social Security number, and he hasn't for years. He is an unperson. And you're not going to be an unperson if you work for somebody else. I believe that people in the patriot movement are ultimately all going to become self-employed. It has to be. I don't think you can work for a corporation, which is an arm of the state, and be free. 7, I'm going to suggest you rent. I know that's not a very popular statement, and there are people here that are going to argue with me. I'm going to tell you, anybody here got a mortgage? How many years? How many years? 30. Anybody go 30? 35, 35, 35, going 35, going 35, 35, 40, 40, 40, 40, going 40. Nothing's higher than 30. Well, 30's bad. I'm going to tell you why you have a mortgage. You know why you have a mortgage. 2 faces of debt. Chicago Fed. Borrowing, such as a mortgage, is a convenient way of obtaining the use of expensive goods, like a house, without renting them. How long's the mortgage? 30 years. 30 years guaranteed rent. You borrow so you don't have to rent. Now, doesn't that make a lot of sense? In fact, they're even going to tell you someplace else that you rent money so that you don't have to rent the house. We use a head. If you're age 30 and you take a 30-year mortgage, it doesn't take an Einstein to figure out that you're going to be 60 at least when the last payment rolls around.
Anybody want to buy a house?
Then on top of that, you get the property taxes. If the property taxes don't get you down, why not just rent the place? And then when the economy goes down the tubes here in Atlanta, you just pack up your bags and you just take a hike down the road. We've got a friend that is living over in Washington State right now. They've got a house down here in Georgia, in Jessup, Georgia. I think they had about $1,000 a month payments on that place. They were only in it for something like 6 months. Moved to Washington State. They've now got a piece of land which they say is their own, and they went to the bank for that too. They're going to build a house. They're renting a house in Washington State. They can't get rid of the house in Jessup yet. How would you like to have those cookies? And you see, if they had just rented in Jessup, they could have packed up their bags, taken their footlocker, thrown it in the trunk, made like a tree, and leave. Now, the Bible says that there's a point in time there when you come, when there's 2 in the field and then one's taken, 2 on the roof and one's taken, that sort of stuff, that you don't even go down into your house to get your belongings. You just make out like a tree and you go. Flexibility may be something we're going to need because we have become slaves in our own country. Just food for thought. You don't have to agree with me. I don't expect you to. Barter or use lawful money. We're talking with NCBA about the idea of having some means of identifying those of us of our persuasion. Realize that the enemy's going to know who we are very quickly. I don't care. There's probably an IRS agent here right now. They're eventually going to play back every statement I've ever made, I'm sure, and they're going to try to indict me for something, for maybe trying to raise a riotous condition against the government or something, conspiracy or whatever. But, you know, when people have a MasterCharge or a Visa card, they go around looking for places that have those little decals on the window. How about if we had a decal that was nice blue, true blue, about the color of his vest or sweater back there, with a gold coin and a silver coin and bright white letters underneath that say, Unbank. What's that? Is that a new kind of credit card? No, that's cash. And when you go into that place, that person accepts gold and silver at a fair parity, not at its real parity, because if the real parity is ever discovered, boy, gold and silver are going to go through the ceiling. It's only because most people don't want it yet that it's so cheap in Fed notes. But you go in there and the price of a sandwich is $3, but the guy's going to take 30 cents or 3 dimes of silver for the same sandwich. And the next sucker behind is going to have to give up 3 Fed notes. And he's going to ask the merchant, how come that guy only had to pay 30 cents? And I got to pay $3. Well, it's very easy, the merchant says. He paid for his sandwich, and you're simply going to defer the payment with yours. You see, you now have a means, additional means of witnessing, because people are looking for what you do, not just what you say. I've had patriot groups that have paid me in silver coins for books and so forth. Now I've got to find a publisher that will take silver coins, and I'm going to find one. Won't be any problem. Engage the enemy with public office money certificates. Anybody who does not know what a POMC is? POMC is a public office money certificate. It's a promise to pay in the money of account, or United States money, which all public offices are required to keep their accounts in, even though it doesn't say that in the current statute 31 U.S.C. 5101. But it tells us right in the very front page of the title books, there has been no change in substance, that the statutes are presumed to be the law, and they were taken word for word from Section 20 of the Coinage Act, April 2nd, 1792, which is still the law according to the Federal Reserve. All public offices have to keep their accounts current in the money of account. You just simply offer to pay them in the money of account for property taxes, sewer taxes, and so forth and so on, if they'll just tell you what in blue blazes it is. Because you can't deliver it until they tell you what it is. Give them 120 days and so forth, after which your instrument is void. Public offices love POMCs. They can't wait for you to give them a POMC. Why, people have been using POMCs in every country, in every state in the Union. I call them negotiable Drano. When things get a little bit tight, a little bit bound up, constipated down there at City Hall, you just flush them out with a POMC, and things just start really moving down there. Better still, write a POMC. How many people here have written a POMC? How many people here have written a POMC on behalf of someone else? How do you do it? Do you owe any taxes? How much do you owe? Oh, you figure. I'll write a POMC to your tax officer for you. I'll write them a letter. Now, you got to write to me, so I got to figure out who you are. You tell me who you are, or better still, let's get something like the Justice Times or one of those newspapers to have a little column. And all it's got to have in it is the name of the tax protestor, the sum of the tax due, the reason for the tax, property tax, sewer tax, excise tax, etc., and the name and address of your tax collector. That's all that's needed.
I've had 13 people write to my tax collector offering to redeem the POMC.
Well, that's decent of them. That's good. That's a good start. Now, if you get maybe 13 POMCs that get written on your behalf by somebody else, they can't prosecute you for writing some sort of a crazy instrument. But you see, when somebody introduces Bruce McCarthy as an expert, you believe it. If I stand up here and say, hey, I'm an expert on money, you can say, that guy is awful boastful, and he who exalts himself shall be abased. But he who abases himself shall be exalted. Don't sit at the head of the table. Sit at the foot of the table. Who knows? You may be advanced to the head of the table. When someone else writes a POMC on your behalf or her behalf with a nice little letter, it sounds so sweet, and they should send a copy to you, and you'll just love to add those to your file. There's no reason, so far as I can see, why at least 1,000 POMC shouldn't be written on behalf of everybody who's got a tax problem from all over the country. Well, you could become a national celebrity. People down in your little town of Atlanta, oh my gosh, this person here is getting POMCs from Hawaii and Maine, and gosh, this person must be really something. They don't respond to logic. They don't know what logic is. They don't respond to law. They could care less about law, but they like statutes. In fact, Proverbs 29, verse 19, is a passage I think you're going to want to write down. Proverbs 29:19. Accept that on faith. I haven't told you what it is yet. A servant will not be corrected by words, for though he understand, he will not answer. We'll come back to that one. What they do like is public opinion. And a POMC, or 1,000 of them, is public opinion. Pack the courthouse. If anybody here has a court action, hopefully you don't sue people. Jesus warned us about not suing people and taking our brethren into the court. And you have no idea if the tax collector might be a brethren in the faith. Because you won't get out of there without paying every last farthing. Why? Jesus said why. Because the scribes and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. If Moses was sitting in judgment, I would go to court. Moses ain't there. Have you been to court recently? They're not there. The law of God is not there. The Spirit of the Lord is not there in that courtroom. We could run the banks through a bankruptcy proceeding. People say, well, how are we going to go back to gold and silver? Simple. We audit the Fed. We then restore all the gold and silver that they now have, wherever it is, but it hasn't been blown off into outer space. It can be gotten back. Return it to the Treasury, have the Treasury strike it into coin form using a system of weights and measures everybody understands, not dollars and cents, ounces. Identify it either in troy or avoirdupois, and identify the purity on at least one side of the coin so a person knows how much he has. Not how much it's worth, because it'll be worth one thing to him one day and something else another day, but how much it weighs. You have a right to know how much it weighs and how pure it is. We then return all the gold and silver coins through the banking system in proportion to the assets they think they have. So Chase Manhattan will get more gold and silver coins than our little banks in Maine. Then give the public 30, 60, or 90 days, whatever seems fair, to bid all of their Federal Reserve notes and their checking account deposits, because there's no connection between the two. Checks grossly exceed Federal Reserve notes. In fact, in 1979, if you tried to take all of your checks and convert them into Federal Reserve notes, they would have been short $165 billion. Just a modest oversight. See? Bid all of the numbers that you have in your checking account and the Federal Reserve notes against gold and silver coins. Oh, that's terrible! I can hear somebody saying it now. That's terrible. Why? It might take $1,000 in Fed notes to get a 1-ounce silver coin. Is that a problem? No. Because the silver coin is now going to carry the value of 1,000 Fed notes. Now people say, hey, silver's pretty valuable, isn't it? Sure is. That's why you don't need to carry very much of it when you go down to get yourself an automobile. Anybody here in this room remember the $500 automobile? Yeah? Would automobiles have sold, in fact, Model Ts went for $380, I think, brand new, right? $380, I think, in the 1920s. Would a Model T have sold for $380 if the Federal Reserve hadn't been floating 60% fraudulent notes from the very beginning? It's the fraudulent notes that kept pushing the price up. Would a Model T have sold for $380 if the local banks, at the same time, hadn't been creating deposits at the rate of, say, 6 to 1? An automobile might have sold for $100, maybe $50. You got any idea how little metal that is? Just a couple little gold coins, uninflatable, and you go right downtown and you ping, and you flip that, and you walk out with a brand new Ford. Of course. There are far more receipts for land than there is land. There are far more receipts for gold than there is gold. No problem. Just buy up all the receipts. Then burn up all the receipts, and we now have restored the gold and silver to the American people. And the prices have been rolled back. I realize it's a very simplistic approach, but I haven't heard anything better than that yet. You see, folks, we've got 3 courses of action, and I'm going to rely now upon a theologian by the name of Francis Schaeffer. Francis Schaeffer wrote a book called the Christian Manifesto. In fact, he wrote others. And in the Christian Manifesto, he said that as Christians, we have three courses of action we can take. One is we can protest, and we haven't been doing a very good job of protesting. But when the protestation is over, we then flee. And when I talk to groups like this, there's always somebody saying, hey, how about setting up a little patriot community out in the bush someplace, and we'll just have our own little town. Nice idea, but I'm not sure if it's going to be feasible. I'd like to think it was. But we're going to quickly go from the protest and the flee to the one that I'm afraid is coming, and it's fight. F-I-G-H-T. And that's not with words. And it's not a fight, I don't think, just merely standing out on the front of the church holding your Bible as the police start walking off with your children. You see, the children are the wards of the state, and the reason the children are the wards of a state is because most everybody who got married got a marriage license, didn't they? And a marriage license, according to Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, is permission granted by a higher authority for a couple to intermarry. Now, we go to intermarriage in Black's Law Dictionary, 5th edition, and it says, see, miscegenation. Miscegenation, interracial marriage as between a white and a Negro. See, that was unscriptural. The Bible says kind after kind. In Ezra and in Numbers, our ancestors were punished when they took of them wives of other peoples. You can argue with that. Fine, go ahead. God made whites, he made blacks, he made yellows. He didn't make harlequins. I don't hate blacks and I don't hate Orientals. But I'm not married to one either. What God made, he made pure. And that which the Father did not plant will be uprooted. We were even commanded in the Scriptures, in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy, that we were not to lay two kinds of seed in the field, that they become defiled. What do you suppose that means? But you see, when you apply for the marriage license, the product of that corporate union, the product is now regulatable by he who grants the privilege. What's the product of a marriage? Children. Whose children are they? The state's. You don't believe it? Try taking your kids out of a public school and putting them into a private school. Try taking them out of the public school and putting them into a private school that has no license, and you see whose children those are. They're not yours. In fact, I heard of a case just recently that's been litigated apparently in the courts. I haven't read about the case, but I was told about it. And a couple had found out that their daughter had been given contraceptives against their approval by a state agency. The argument that was posed by the state was, we grant you an exemption for your children, therefore we can do as we please. Exemptions are not lawful. They're privileges granted by an entity that can withdraw them. We're going to have to restructure our thinking because there are very few people that really think free. Churches are going to have to become unincorporated, get away from this tax-exempt status, the 501c3 IRS code provision, which now makes them regulatable by internal revenue. And you will do as we say, Bob Jones. Supreme Court ruling. Fight. Well, the Bible doesn't command a fight. Yes, it does. There's a time for peace and a time for war. Doesn't it say that in Ecclesiastes? This country is heading for war, civil war. That's the worst kind. I understand the Civil War of the United States cost us more lives than all the lives that were lost at all the cumulative battles after that. And the scars aren't finished yet. In fact, Abraham Lincoln saddled us with U.S. notes and debt-free, interest-free fraud, and we've had it ever since, among other problems. But in Nehemiah chapter 4, when our ancestors were rebuilding the city of Jerusalem, in verse 14, Nehemiah saying to the people, and I looked up and rose up and said unto the nobles and to the rulers and to the rest of the people, be not ye afraid of them, remember the Lord which is great and terrible, and fight for your brethren, your sons and your daughters, your wives and your houses. Verse 21 gives us kind of the scenario here. So we labored in the work, and half of them held the spears from the rising of the morning till the stars appeared. Jesus said in Luke 22:36, let he who does not have a sword sell his cloak and go buy one. Now you may think that was taken out of context, but Peter said, Lord, we have two, and Jesus said, that's enough. walking around with armed disciples. And when you carried a sword back in those days, you had parity with the soldiers. To have parity with the soldiers now, you want to carry a 6,000 round per minute, 20 millimeter General Electric Vulcan cannon. Okay? That thing doesn't go rat-a-tat-tat-tat. It sings. Zing. That gives you parity. Everybody ought to have an F-16 in his front yard. Okay? We had parity once. You see, we have all kinds of promises that people love to take out of the Bible. Oh, I'm saved, glory, I'm saved. And then the I fly away. I'll fly away, oh glory, I'll fly away. I ain't got me no responsibility, I'll fly away. That's the doctrine of the church. Correct any problems? Oh, no. Heck, Nehemiah stood there in chapter 5, and he holds a great assembly against those people who are exacting usury of the people. Why wasn't he out there telling them, do you know Jesus? No. He's holding an assembly against them, asking them to repent from a sin. What is sin? Transgression of the law. Why would we ask for people to repent if it weren't for the law of God? Apostle Paul says he wouldn't have known sin if it hadn't been for the law. No point in having an altar call if there's no repentance. There's no repentance if there's no law to repent in accordance with. Grace did not repeal the law. In fact, grace even precedes the law of Moses. Leviticus chapter 26, verse 7 and 8. These are kind of interesting passages here for the saber rattlers in the crowd. And ye shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 of you shall put 10,000 to flight. And your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. That's a blessing for obedience to the commandments of God. We're outnumbered. We sure are. God has never worked or wrought a victory with a majority of people. He always works with a little group. That's why I knew I was in the right room when I came in here. If there were 5,000 people here, I would have asked, is this a Mary Kay convention? Or maybe it's an Amway convention. It certainly wouldn't be a Patriot convention.